and this panel is called Tales from the Road. It's a panel where I will be asking questions and we'll be discussing issues surrounding fundraising, which, as you know, is the focus of this conference. It's what we specialize in here. I work with Life Science Nation, the hosts of this conference, and we do this panel at every conference because we find that companies really like to hear from other entrepreneurs who tell real stories about their fundraising journeys. And we try to put together a very diverse panel of different profiles of fundraisers. And today we have a really fantastic panel. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the panel and have them introduce themselves. And I would ask the panelists to give us a little bit of background on yourselves personally, but also what kinds of companies have you been working for in the past, and what relevant experiences have you had relating to fundraising. So I can start with Alan Lucas on my left. Would you mind introducing yourself, Alan?
Sure.
And we'll try to speak up. I know the acoustics in here aren't great.
I would suggest everyone to move up closer to be a little more intimate in the conversation while you can. But then while you're doing that, I'll make a brief introduction of myself. So I've been involved with medical devices, primarily procedure-specific instrumentation and implants, surgeon preference products for my entire career. And in that, I've had the opportunity to be involved in about 7 emerging technology companies and numerous others that I've either mentored or advised along the way. In my current company, which is Navigation Sciences, where I'm currently fundraising now, and I've raised the initial seed capital for it through friends and family funds. So not huge checks, but not small checks in the sense that they're about 500,000, 400, 250,000 each in the seed round, versus a prior company where I raised in $25,000, $50,000, and $75,000. And I can tell you that it's more difficult raising in $25,000, $50,000, and $75,000 bites than it is to raise in $500,000 bites. And so that's just a little bit of tidbit of information I can give you there on that. Been very focused in a particular market sector, minimally invasive surgery, so I know all about that and can sort of certainly express that to my investors. Technology, I licensed out of a major hospital in the Boston community after being introduced to that technology from their licensing office. Gives you a little background there.
Okay, great. So Alan is based in Boston, as you mentioned. Sitting next to Alan is Tript Bhatia,
Yes.
Who's based in Singapore, and she's going to tell us a little bit about fundraising from a different perspective. So tell us a bit about yourself.
Absolutely. So hello everyone, it's a pleasure being here today and for you to all to make it here in the afternoon. It's great to see you all. Just a bit about me. So I work for an organization called Access Health International. It's a healthcare focused think tank and advisory group. And what we do is really work with, well, what I do particularly is work with startups based out of the US, India, Indonesia, and really help them scale into Asia. So really find out what is their go-to-market strategy, plus help them with the fundraising. So in a nutshell, and I can share a little bit more in more details later during the panel discussion or even afterwards, but in a nutshell, that's kind of what we do. My personal background is prior to doing this, prior to joining Access Health, I spent about a decade in finance sector. I largely worked with sovereigns in both Southeast Asia and South Asia, helping them both on the investment side, so working with sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, both on the public and private investment, as well as working with sovereigns on raising capital for infrastructure, healthcare, and so on and so forth. I can add a little bit of my personal background as well. I'm a microbiologist by training. I'm based in Singapore. I've lived in 5 different countries, Hong Kong being one of the longest.
Great, thank you. Tim Lawrence is sitting next to Trip. Tim, tell us about yourself.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be back. I think this is now my 4th or 5th RESI conference. It was a good experience. So my background, I was here actually at the last conference fundraising, and we closed our last round of funding here at the conference last year. I run a toothbrush company. We have a toothbrush that emits blue light that kills bacteria and gently whitens your teeth simultaneously. We have proprietary IP. We're in a number of different licensing discussions, as well as having our branded product going to market. My background is I started a pediatric health business about 10 years ago. It was a startup. We grew it organically, self-funded, and it's sold in CVS, Walgreens, in 10 countries worldwide. As I said, we sold that business a couple of years ago to focus on this new product, and then prior to that, various corporate Fortune 500 positions, and originally a physicist, hence the light-emitting toothbrush.
Very good. Nancy Reeves, tell us a bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, it's nice to be here today and to see all of you. This is my 4th RESI conference. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I'm on my 7th venture. I have always been in life science, but kind of have moved around between implants, cardiovascular implants, digital health, and biotech. I've raised $500 million. The number's a little skewed because I did an IPO, which really helps. And my current company, Alteryx Bio, is being translated out of the Brigham and MIT in Boston. And we have a new novel drug that we've developed by reformulating a drug that's 30 years old to treat metabolic disease and endocrine concerns. Our first asset is AJ003 for type 2 diabetes, and our product is called LUCI for luminal coating of the intestine. And the concept was envisioned at the Brigham about 8 years ago, and it's been under development. And what we're trying to do is to mimic the duodenal isolation that happens after Roux-en-Y bypass surgery. I don't know if you know, but the last decade there have been 11 publications that have demonstrated that patients that have type 2 diabetes that are insulin dependent, if they have Roux-en-Y bypass surgery, before they leave the hospital, so they've lost no weight whatsoever, that 80% of them go off insulin. And at 5 years, 50% of them stay off of insulin. And so we're trying to mimic, but with a drug, very short-term effect, with a drug that's safe, coats your proximal gut after, you take it before you eat. It lasts 3 to 4 hours. It does not get in the bloodstream, so it's very safe. And we've shown in animals that we've had similar results after feeding the animals and then doing glucose tolerance. We can reduce the glucose absorption by about 50%. So we have finished our animal work. We raised $1.1 million from the MIT Alumni Angels. We're on the MIT campus in Cambridge. And we're here starting our Series A financing of $10 million, which will get us into humans for single ascending and multi-ascending dose studies.
Okay, great. So you can see we have a very interesting panel with different, from different geographical areas and different types of experience. But there's one thing that they all have in common is they all are working on raising money in one way or another for their projects. And what I have seen talking to entrepreneurs here at the RESI conference and in our dealings at Life Science Nation is that a lot of early stage companies have unrealistic expectations about how long it takes to raise money. And since we have this panel assembled today, I thought I would ask you, how long, does it take from the time you initiate a conversation with a new investor to, signing a term sheet and actually getting some money? what would you estimate? And some of you are serial entrepreneurs and have done this before, and you may already have very good relationships with some investors that help speed up the process. But if you were, to not take that into account, how long do you think someone can realistically expect to take to raise $1 million seed round or something like that? What would you say, Alan?
I guess the first thing I'd say, you have to kiss a lot of frogs to find the prince, because you really do have to meet and talk and connect to a lot of people. You can very often receive checks from the individuals that you least expected, and those that you do expect not receive anything. So just little tidbits along the way there to think about. In this current company that I'm working on, the three main investors are clients for a consulting firm that I do a lot of work with. So they are high net worth individuals that run companies that are somewhat familiar with the health technology space. So the the relationships have been long and deep, I think is the best way to describe that. And they've not only invested in this company, but they've also invested in other companies that we have relationships with. So in this instance, it's almost a friends and family round, but with larger numbers than we would typically have. Working the network is about the best way to describe it, and keeping good records of individuals whom you speak with, and almost, if you get a Salesforce.com like type approach, where you really follow through, because a lot of it has to do with follow through. I've always found the first meeting is not necessarily going to be the meeting that writes the check, but it's that maintaining that relationship. Lots of investors might watch you for a year or two. With one of our portfolio companies, we're third year here at JP Morgan, talking with potential companies for an exit. In each one of those visits are sometimes the third year or fourth year since we've met with those companies, and showing them the progress along the way. Well, it's the same with investors. Many investors want to see progress that you make before they make their first investment. And they may not mind if the valuation goes higher during that time period, but they see the progress that you make along the way.
I would reiterate that. I think, especially in Asia, one of the challenges is finding that first lead investor. So it's really like building up that relationship way before you even start fundraising. So you need to network, meet these people, understand what are their kind of investment philosophies, if there's certain therapeutic areas that they're particularly interested in, if they're strategic or not. But just really building up that relationship is important, and that takes time. And as my panelists here mentioned, it's important from the investor's perspective. They like to see you meet track record, right? So you're not just talking, let's say they like to see you over a period of time before they write out that first check. So my tidbit would be to really start early, and also do your due diligence on the investors as well. So really identify which are the right ones.
And what would you tell the companies that you're working with to expect? That they could raise money in?
So I've seen a range from all the way from 6 months to 2 years.
Mm-hmm. And better to plan for the worst.
Exactly.
Hope for the best.
Hope for the best.
But plan for the worst.
Exactly.
Tim, what has your experience been?
Yeah, that's pretty consistent. In our case, it took about 7 or 8 months, but I think it takes a lot of tuning of the presentation. It takes a lot of tuning of your business model and your prototypes, if you have those. That is not included in the 7 or 8 months, and that may take years sometimes. But I actually heard a statistic from an investor. I think he said 48 is the average number of investor meetings before you get funded. And that's an average. There's obviously a range there. But he's a pretty credible source. So that's pretty daunting.
Yeah, I never heard that statistic before, but that's in line with kind of what I thought. But that's interesting to hear that from someone experience. How about you, Nancy?
So I think that you have to plan 9 months, even if you are a serial entrepreneur, because investors have a process, they want to go through the diligence. Some investors will give you a term sheet right up front and then make it contingent on the due diligence. My experience is most of them do most of the due diligence up front and then start to negotiate terms when they've just got a few things left. And I think when you're meeting investors, the most important thing is to try to get a warm introduction. So whether it's through Life Science Nation, your attorneys, your network, people you know, that makes all the difference in that first email or whatever your outreach is to get a warm introduction. And I hear people say, well, you want to do due diligence on the VCs. I think that's really important, but don't ask them for a list of their due diligence. What I do is I go and look at their portfolio and get the names of the other CEOs, and then I call them and I say, what kind of investor have they been? How are they on the board? What's it like to work with? Because you're going to be spending more time with the investors, especially if you're in the C-suite, often than you're going to be spending sometimes with your own team. And I've had boards and investors that were terrific, and I've had others that were awful, right? Before I learned to kind of do that. So it's something I definitely recommend that you do and even at the beginning when you start talking to the investors, to kind of get a sense of what the other CEOs will tell you. What are they looking for? What don't they like? What are areas where they'll negotiate terms with you? So you can kind of get a leg up. And I'm surprised how many people don't do that, because it's a kind of, basic, easy thing for us to do as entrepreneurs. Yeah.
And you found that other CEOs are open to discussing those things. They're happy to do that.
They are, because at least my impression, and particularly in the Northeast, we have a pretty tight ecosystem. But we've all learned, trust me, at every company we've been at, and we don't have many people we can talk to things like that about. And as long as you say to them, this will be in confidence, right? Because we're entrepreneurs. Let's face it, guys, the investors talk all the time, right? They're always talking to their syndicates and who they like and stuff. And we as entrepreneurs, candidly, have not done a very good job of that, I don't think, historically. And the more we do that, I think the more we can help each other, So it's a small tip, but it's one I think you really should think about.
Just to follow on a little bit on what Nancy had to say, is the network is really incredibly important. But one of the things I truly believe in approaching this just like you approach sales, in the sense that your product is your company and yourself, or yourself and your company, because really you're selling yourself for this, and really and do an analysis of where the investors are in your market vertical. Because you can spend a lot of time talking to investors who won't invest in the market vertical or the market space that you're in. So segmenting of the market is to me incredibly important. Also, having a real understanding about what your capital requirements and capital needs are to cash flow break even or exit, or really know what the total capital needs are, because different investors invest at different size companies. And they have large funds that are going to only invest in companies that require large capital amounts to actually move the needle in their fund. So if you only need $15 million to an exit, you're going to be looking for a very specific investor of a smaller size than if you need $100 million to get to an exit. So very, very careful about how you segment out that market and what your cash requirements are. So you save a lot of time and effort on your own part. The other thing I would also recommend is doing a pre-seed round. And maybe some folks talk about that now or not. I'm not sure if it's a topic for this, but really putting together enough capital, internal monies or friends and family, however you want to call it, but this pre-seed round to really stabilize and get your company organized, to get all the financial modeling done, to get some of early proof of principle to a certain level. before you actually go out and fundraise. Because there's the appetite for just a pure startup an idea on a napkin really doesn't exist anymore.
That's been your experience as well, that a pre-seed round might be a way to gain a little bit of validation before you go out and raise bigger money.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the pivotal moment for us was when we had a prototype, because we could talk a lot about the technology and the patents and the business models, and ultimately it was showing them what the end product looked like that really convinced them.
Yep.
So, I mean, that doesn't apply to every opportunity, but...
No, that's like a medical device related
Yeah.
Experience.
Exactly, exactly. If you can show them the promised land, so to speak, what that looks like, what it feels like. I mean, you're selling a product to some extent. Obviously, you're selling the team as well, but it's a commercial. It's an infomercial. If I can say put it that way, an infomercial for investors.
Very good. Were you going to ask something? Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, maybe one question. So, for those companies that have already an operation going, how much time do you actually devote to fundraising, as opposed to running the show, making sure that the day-to-day business is going?
So
How much time do you spend?
Can I answer that?
Or how do you prepare?
That's a good one for Nancy.
Having raised a lot of money.
Yeah.
So I would say, and this will probably shock you, but you're always raising money as the CEO. The minute that you close one round, I give myself 2 to 3 weeks, and then I start again. Because you have to get those relationships queued up. And if the next series investor is watching you execute, it makes the next round go very quick. I've done some in less than 60 days, but they were following us for a year and a half. So I found, and maybe I'm skewed, but I probably spend 40% of my time on investor, or let's just say keeping the company financed, right? And everything that includes. I spend about 40% of my time, yeah.
I think that depends a lot on how long the lead time is to get the product to market. Because it may be that you get the funding and then you're going to market in 12 months.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've never done a product that got to market in 12 months. I've done class 3 implants, and I'm doing biotech. So, yeah, I think you're right. It's very dependent on the product, but if you're doing a regulated class 3 device, and even some 510Ks with clinicals, right? And biotech or biopharma, it takes a while. Yeah.
I would kind of reiterate some of the points which are highlighted here. I think, honestly, it's at least in Singapore, I think it's really, or in Southeast Asia in general, there is a significant amount of time that entrepreneurs or CEOs end up spending just on fundraising. Part of it is, as I said, it's just more from a relationship building aspect and really understanding those investors. But at the same time, there are competing interests, like they want to show execution and track record. So, which is why actually where we add value as an organization. So as Access Help, a couple of points that you raised, really understanding how investors think, getting that feedback. That's something that we funnel as a neutral party, because we work with the digital health startups in Asia, and then so we get a sense of what are the investors interested in, what are the feedbacks from the startups, and so on and so forth. So we help smoothen that process.
Okay, great, thank you. I think there was a question in the back.
Yes, I was wondering if you could expand on that. You've given us the message that it takes longer than we expect, and you should always be fundraising. How do you queue up a round for the next valuation milestone? Like, you have a clinical trial in process. How do you queue it up so that you're ready when the data comes out to actually get to term sheet?
So, do you want me to take?
Yeah.
Yeah, so one way to do it, and Alan mentioned this earlier, whether you call it pre-seed or you do it at night while you're still working in another job, or you take a return from an exit and build the model, you really need to build the model against what you know are the value inflections for your sector, whether it's med tech, digital, or whatever. So for example, in biotech, the real value inflections are phase 1, right? When you file the IND and the FDA says you can go to humans, then phase 2, and then phase 3. So you can build the model like, we built the model for through phase 2, because in our sector, we know from Silicon Valley Bank that's looked at all the deals for the last 10 years, that 89% of the acquisitions happen after phase 2, right? So we know when we raised the first $1 million with the MIT alumni, that we need $30 million to get through phase 2, which is very capital efficient for a biotech, because we're outsourcing a number of things and we've reformulated a drug, so we don't have a lot of the discovery, right? So when you take the Series A that we're talking to investors now about, you need to agree with them what the value inflection is, right? Because you want to make sure you have enough cash to hit that, because otherwise you won't get a step up and it'll be a flat round, and they won't be happy because they'll have to tell their fund that they've not had an increase in value, and you won't be happy. You've just worked your tail off, right, for 18 months in your team, and you're not getting an uptake. So if you agree with them what they are up front, that's a really important thing. And sometimes getting agreement on that can be as important as a lot of other terms on the term sheet, so that you both know what you're going for. And then if you know that, and you know, in our case, so we're raising 10, we need another 18 to do phase 2, then right after we close the round, I'll talk to the investors that have invested and say, who else do you like in your syndicate that we should get on a short list, and start telling them the story and have them watch us execute. So that's one way to do it, is to get those value inflections. And then the other trick, which we've all probably learned, it always takes longer than you think. So I always try to raise enough cash for 2 quarters past what I thought the value inflection would be, so you don't run out of cash. Because that happened to me once. It's really ugly. Really ugly.
So I guess the message is you raise for 18 months, do all the work to the value inflection point in 12, and then prepare for your next round. Maybe also to add to that a little bit is to prepare a waterfall analysis. Does you all know what I mean by that? So really understand where the value inflection points are that are going to double your enterprise value, so that when you go out for the next round, you maintain the same level of dilution and or valuation for you and your co-founders. So I highly recommend doing that, and don't miss your value inflection points.
Any other comments? Another issue I wanted to bring up, kind of changing gears. Here at RESI, we have companies here today from all over the world, and at various stages of development and various stages of experienced management teams. And there are a lot of first-time entrepreneurs who come and they're raising money here. So, we always hear that investors are very much investing in the team and in the people as much as they're investing in the technology. So what do you do if your CEO is less experienced or has no experience as an entrepreneur? If they're doing this for the first time, how can a less experienced CEO make up for that lack of experience? Because all of you did this for the first time once, right? You were there at some point. So how do you make up for that?
I think there's a few ways. I mean, one thing certainly is you have an extended team. So we have a patent attorney, for example. You can highlight the experience of your patent attorney. You can highlight the experience of your engineering team, your marketing team. So it's really a team. It's not just an individual. So that's definitely one thing. The other thing is, if you don't have the experience, go and get it. Go read books on the topic. Go to seminars. Go watch videos. Educate yourself, so you can talk the talk. As well as walk the walk. Two things.
So you don't think an investor will want to say, what's your track record?
Yes, of course.
So if you don't have a track record, you
Right.
need to somehow make up for that.
So I would say a couple of things. One is, maybe be targeted about who you would want to invite on your board of advisors. Second is, if you're a med advisor in the clinical space, really getting that buy-in from key opinion leaders. I think that goes a long way. In fact, the experiences we've seen is investors come to us sometimes, like as an organization, to help validate a company. They're like, okay, is this really going to work? Because we have a network of key KOLs and is part of Access Health. So really kind of getting that level of support, I think, is quite important.
Mm-hmm. And Nancy, you have some thoughts on that as well, right?
I also think it really helps to have a mentor or someone which is what I did the first time, was someone that I'd worked with before who was the CEO who had been very inspiring and helpful. And when I went to do my first company, I said to him, can you informally advise me, right? So that I understand what to ask, what not to ask, and kind of how to position that. And I know we talked about the network, but in Boston, for example, there's a number of groups that have entrepreneurs that are semi-retired or, are in the market where you want to be, that are not scientists and not KOLs, but actual business people. And, try to team up with them. I, every year, pick 3 CEOs that I help mentor for no cost whatsoever. And they call me with questions, and I have their investors call me, and they'll say, well, what do you think? You've been working with this person for the last 6 months. And I'll say, I think they're really strong here. But to your point, the team is really great, and if you get the right board members and support, I think they're going to be terrific, So try to find someone in your community that will help you, and then when they do, pay it back and help somebody else, because we all are going to have first-time entrepreneurs. I mean, we weren't born thinking about how to build a company or raise money.
Also, in addition to that, I know you, Nancy, work with a CFO that you're very close with.
Yeah, we're in our 3rd company together.
In those kinds of relationships with CFOs are I think, incredibly important. And they have, some have different attributes. Some are very good at modeling, for instance, but not very good necessarily on the strategic side. But a relationship with the CFO to me is extremely important in managing not only the cash, but managing the inflection points and advisor and having someone other than your board, I think, as well, to ask questions for sort of your personal advisor or your personal board versus necessarily your actual board members, because you need somebody that you can ask questions of that you might not ask your board.
But as an early stage company, you can't always hire a full-time CFO, right, when you're getting started.
No, and you typically
There are
don't.
ways to manage
Right.
that, right?
You typically don't. You have interim CFOs, and as you outgrow that interim CFO, you bring in others.
Right.
Tim, have you had any experience building a board of advisors that were strong in areas where you had less experience?
Yeah, our current board, absolutely. So I'm a physicist, I'm not a dentist. So we have a dentist on our board. It helps a lot because they have perspectives I would never have on building this device. So absolutely, you need to bring in the right experience, both on the board as well as your team, obviously, but the board especially from a strategic point of view.
And of course, that brings more credibility to your whole project by having people with expertise in different areas.
Absolutely.
Is it expensive to have qualified and expert advisory board members?
Not necessarily. We have a selection of different types of people on our board, but in some cases you can just give them stock options. It doesn't have to cost anything.
But there's also resources. So in Boston, I grew up there, so I'm somewhat partial to Boston and New England. But we have, I'm a VMS mentor, venture mentoring service at MIT. There's Mass Challenge. There's a number of various resources available for early stage entrepreneurs or first time entrepreneurs to get that mentorship that helps them grow as business managers or business founders. So there are a number of resources. I'm sure in the Bay Area, I know that there are also a number of resources for that. And some of them are market specific and some of them are general.
And it sounds like Trip, your organization is kind of that mentor organization that helps inexperienced entrepreneurs. Right?
Exactly. I think also just, I'm going to segue a little bit, but one of the things that what's interesting when we work with some of these early stage startups is they don't really think about the business model early on, which I think is a bit unusual. So, really thinking about, and maybe this is coming more from a Southeast Asia perspective, like really understanding who the payer of your product is. I think that's the first question, which surprisingly a lot of startups aren't able to answer, which is a bit shocking. But really leveraging mentors, people in the industry with that market knowledge or that health systems knowledge to help them think through that aspect of things is also important, and that's also an area that we focus on.
Okay, very good. Any questions from the audience at this point?
Yes.
Hello.
Way back here.
Hey.
All right, you talked about the tactics and all of that, but what about kind of the emotional thing, 9 months grinding away, doing all those things. Talk about some of the methods you use to kind of cope with that, being a CEO and trying to raise money, all of that kind of stuff. It'd be good to hear some of that, type of insight.
I don't see the 9 months as being a heavy burden or heavy grind, frankly, because you've planned for it, and you've accepted that that's what you want to do. A question that I think is more difficult to answer might be, when do you say this isn't working and it's time to walk away? Because you become incredibly emotionally involved and very, very focused on what you're doing. And if you're not meeting milestones and not achieving success, and you continue doing that for month after month after month, and you keep saying, well, just around the corner, it's just around the corner, you really have to take an objective look at that and get advice on taking an objective look on what you're doing. Because you can go on doing that for a year, 2 years, not making progress, because it's just around the corner.
So when do you throw in the towel?
Very tough question. I think we've all done situations where we wish we had made a transition sooner and look back and say, why didn't I do this earlier?
Has anyone else had an experience like that?
Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a very emotional process. It's a roller coaster, actually, raising money, and you're going to have some tough moments where you thought you had a deal, and then things fall apart, and then you have to dust yourself off and find the next investor. To some extent, you have to look at your own business as an investor and say, do you really believe in the idea? If you believe in the idea, it almost doesn't matter what anyone else thinks to some extent. If you believe in the idea enough, then it's really just about how do you solve all those shortcomings? How do you solve those problems that you have in your business? Or it may be your market model, or it may be your IP or whatever. Fix those things. As long as the foundation is sound, you've got to keep the faith and believe in your idea.
So I just want to add to what you said. I think being an entrepreneur is the most challenging but most rewarding thing you can do. And it's in your blood. I'm sure in entrepreneurs, there are people that just can't stop. I'm one of them. But I think you have to be realistic, because you're going to get 30 to 40 no's before you ever get a yes. And you've got to understand, the pros and cons, but you need a way to mentally recharge, because if you don't come out enthusiastic and knowledgeable and somebody that they want to invest in, then you're not going to get there, right? So for me, it's exercise, right? And for different people, it's something else, but something that gets the endorphins going, or a support system. You know, my husband knows that I'm serially crazy. He gets it, right? And when I get like, oh shit, the world's falling in, you know, he's like, it's okay, you've been there, you know, 3 times before, but, you know, you need to give yourself some space or whatever. And he understands that. So you need that in your life, someone that is your partner, friend, whatever, family that supports it. And they need to know it's going to happen, but you get through it. I read a really interesting book on startups, and they call this emotional journey the valley of death. You know, you start out, I have the greatest product in the entire world. Everybody's going to love it, you know, and you get people, if consulting or taking stock, whatever, helping you, and then something goes wrong, and a deal falls through, or the prototype doesn't work. I mean, come on, we've all been there, right? It didn't go the way you said, and you say, oh my God, this is the worst thing in the world. So you kind of go through that valley, and you come back out, or at least most people come back out. And that's when it can be really fun, because then as your team and you've gone through that, it really pulls you together in a way that it's hard to imagine when you get through the adversity. And what I found in raising money, even like going between A and B and B and C, I always told my team what was going on, right? I never said, oh, this is a walk in the park and, you know, 20 people are going to give us money and don't you worry. I told them how hard it was and why I wasn't there. And I was on the road all the time, right? Pitching and then I'd pitch to them and they'd say, oh, that sounds awful, you know, switch, you know. And so I had them involved in the process. When we raised money, they were covering the things that I wasn't watching while I was gone, right? Because they felt like they were part of the process. And I learned that about halfway through my career. In the early beginning, I was afraid to tell the team that we weren't going to raise money, right? So I thought, oh, everybody will jump ship. But what you find is that they're all bought into your vision, right? Or they wouldn't be there. And the more they feel part of that, I think the better it is. So when those awful times come and it doesn't work, they're not looking for a new job, they're looking for a solution, right, to whatever the problem is. So I like to say it's not rocket science. I know you're a physicist. I'm not a scientist. But, you know, it's all about building that team and that culture of getting there and sharing the vision, right? And you got to expect it, guys, because it's a lonely, lonely job. And so many no's. So many people will tell you you're crazy, that'll never happen, you know, you've heard it all, I'm sure.
I have a friend who literally broke him, who went through this whole process of trying to raise money and build a business. And I think back on it, I think one of the mistakes he may have made was he didn't listen. He didn't listen to the feedback people were giving him. And he just had this idea, and he just, you know, I'm just going to do it this way, it's my way or the highway. And I think it's so important as an entrepreneur to really listening, collect the feedback, and take it in and change. You know, your plan's going to change. You have to be flexible and change your plan and adapt to the circumstances. As long as you do that, and you have a sound idea, you know, you can get to the finish line.
So I have a couple of questions. One is, we talked a little bit about these ongoing discussions that may last for months to years before somebody invests. And so we've had several of those conversations where people say, you know, this is very interesting, but it's too early for us. Put us on your mailing list. So from a practical standpoint, what does that mean? And how do you keep that communication going? And then the second question is, in terms of, you know, what's been your experience in transitioning from kind of a virtual company into, you know, a place with an office and a staff in the eyes of investors, and how important that is at what phase of raising money?
So I have an idea on how I keep people that say, I want to follow your progress. I start a distribution list in my contacts or in Salesforce that I call friends of the company. And whenever there's news that's significant, and especially if you're not issuing press releases, like we try to, right now we're still kind of semi-stuff, then I send out that information to them and just say, hey, hot off the press. I don't give them any more detail, but then I send it to them so they know that we're making progress. So, and that's a really easy thing to do, you know, and you can do it in constant contact for like $30 a month or something. And they'll tell you how many opened and how many didn't, they can resend it, that kind of thing. So just a practical approach for keeping them apprised.
No, I'm absolutely convinced about keeping a constant contact or one of the mail programs, Excel file on everybody that you meet. You talk to the company, you talk to somebody 2 weeks after you've met them, they've forgotten about you. If they haven't already forgotten you, but the day after you meet them. So always, as soon as you think you're really badgering people with information and data, they're just recognizing you and what you're doing. So I really do believe you have to stay in front of all your contacts with your activities that you're doing.
I would agree with that, and I think exactly Salesforce, I've seen a lot of startups do that, so just really sending updates, and that's again a great way for the investors to keep track, and especially for meeting targets, making meeting your milestones. It just shows that traction.
There may be other areas of some investors you may have a strong connection with in terms of there may be a potential licensing partner or potential distribution partner, so you can start the conversation as a non-investment conversation, even it could be, hey, we're ready to go to market, you want to be our representative in, whatever territory it is. To your point about the office stuff, I don't think most investors care about office stuff or having offices. I mean, they care about making money, so
Yeah.
that's just cost. Personally, I think it's better.
Capital efficient.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I believe we're out of time, so I'd like to thank the great panelists for sharing their insight with all of us, and I'd like to thank all of you for coming and for the great questions. So I think we had a good discussion today. Thanks very much.